Jerry Salzman, president and everything else. Peter Kaufman, our resident wise man. Michelle Stevens, secretary. And Tu To, the controller. And Mary Jo Rodriguez, vice president, and a very important person here. Ellen Ireland, inspector of elections, and Ernest Miranda and Martin Casas of Square Milner LP, our independent registered accountants. We'll now proceed to the Journal, Daily Journal Corporation formal business, and we'll go through rapidly, and then I'll speak briefly and take questions. If anyone needs help, raise your hand, and somebody will help you give a written voting thing. Ellen, will you please report of the number of shares represented at the meeting?
On December 21st, 2018, the record date fixed by the Board of Directors for determining the shareholders entitled to vote today, there were 1,380,746 shares of common stock of the corporation outstanding. I have a list of the shareholders who were of record as of that date, certified by the corporation's transfer agent, Equinity Trust Company. I also have an affidavit certifying the completion of the mailing of the notice of this meeting, the proxy card, and the 2018 annual report, along with a prepaid postage return envelope to the shareholders. Proxies representing 1,243,845 shares of common stock entitled to vote at this meeting have been filed. The total number of shares represented in person or by proxy at this meeting is 1,243,845, which is more than a majority of voting power of all outstanding common stock of the corporation, and the meeting may proceed. I will attach the affidavits to the minutes of this meeting and have a copy of the minutes of the last annual meeting.
Since we have enough votes in present and a majority for election of all directors, we announce that the directors have all been reelected, and we have Mary Conlon also. We have one new director, right? Mary Conlon, will you raise your hand for the... Mary was an important executive at Pixar before they sold out to Disney. So she has satisfied one of our requirements that all directors be rich. We also like them young and good-looking, but we failed everywhere else. I announced that all those people are now elected as directors, and we now have to approve this amendment to the bylaws, which accomplishes all that. The third proposal is the election of the sixth director. That's Mary Conlon, and that's just happened. And the people of the inspector of elections has evaluated the votes, and everybody has a majority. And I won't go into minor differences in the voting because I usually end up badly off. The audit committee of the board has selected Square Milner LLP as our accountants, and we need to ratify that selection. And that's happening too as the proxies are voted. The inspector of election has tabulated the votes, and there are enough votes to do all that, and all those formal matters have now been done. Jerry, is there anything else I'm supposed to do?
That's it, Charlie.
was very burdensome. So many of you have come from such great distances, I'm going to speak briefly on a number of topics that may interest you. And then I'm going to take questions. It's amazing the number of people at the meeting of the little Daily Journal Corporation, which after all is a pretty small operation. We've got two businesses, one a steadily declining legal newspaper, which now earns about $1 million a year pre-tax and shrinking, and a computer software business where we're trying to automate courts and justice agencies and various other governmental departments. And that is now bigger by far in terms of prospects and customers and employees and so forth than our shrinking newspaper business. And can be imagined how hard it is to deal with a whole bunch of different courts in different states and their advisors and the RFP process and the bureaucracy. This is a part of the software business that the giants tend to hate. They like a business where you just stamp out an extra copy of something and 98% of the revenues go immediately into the till as cash, and there's no extra work. And that is not handling a bunch of justice agencies, attorney generals, state courts, federal courts, and so forth, all over the country with different requirements, different consultants, and of course, steady and aggressive competition. The nature of our business, it's more like technical consulting than it is just stamping out software. It's a very high service business. It's very difficult. The computer science is time consuming and difficult, but just dealing with that much bureaucracy over that many different fields with the political realities and it's just immensely difficult. So it's a very slow, grinding business, and that's the nature of the game. We've always liked it because a business like this requires a company that's very rich and very determined and is willing to keep plugging, and of course that's what the Daily Journal has done. How are we doing? Well, that's hard to judge, but I would say, watching it quite closely, that it's like a pharmaceutical company with 7 wonderful drugs in the pipeline. We have a lot in the pipeline that is very, very important to us. Australia, Canada, California. We're talking big, big markets. And our main competitor is Tyler Technologies, which is listed on the New York Stock Exchange. And of course, they've been at it a long time and they're way bigger. But we are getting some significant volume, and we have some very pleased customers. And how in the hell does the little Daily Journal Corporation attract the government of Australia? Australia is a big place, but I've gotten to love the Australians, and I think it's going to succeed in Australia mightily. And so it takes a long time, and it's hard work, and it's also very difficult work. Not everybody can do this. Just the mass of complexity. We would never be where we are if we didn't have Jerry Salzman to do everything he's done over the last 10 years. Anybody else would have failed at this. Now, Jerry is 80, and he and I have one thing in common. We both use canes. When I'm not in a wheelchair, I use a cane. And so the idea of taking on the whole world when the chairman is 95 and the vice chairman is 89 and the chief executive that does all the work is 80 and uses a cane, it's a very peculiar place that you people have come a long way to. What the hell are you thinking about? It's weird. And what's happened, of course, is that we're standing a bit for some combination of basic morality and sturdy common sense. And it's amazing how well Berkshire Hathaway and the Daily Journal, for that matter, have succeeded with nothing more than basic morality and sturdy common sense. But of course, when people talk about common sense, they mean uncommon sense. Every time you hear that somebody has a lot of common sense, it means he's got uncommon sense. And it is much harder to have common sense than is generally thought. Let me give you an interesting example. In the investment world, it involves an enormous amount of high IQ people trying to be more skillful than normal. You can hardly imagine another activity that gets so much attention. And weird things have happened. And years ago, one of our local investment counseling shops, a very big one, they were looking for a way to get an advantage over other investment counseling shops. And they reasoned as follows. We've got all these brilliant young people from Wharton and Harvard and so forth, and they work so hard trying to understand business and market trends and everything else. And if we just ask each one of our most brilliant men for their single best idea, then created a formula with this collection of best ideas, we would outperform averages by a big amount. And that seemed plausible to them because they were ill-educated. That's what happens when you go to Harvard and Wharton. And so they tried it out, and of course it failed utterly. So they tried it again, and it failed utterly, and they tried it a third time, and it also failed. And of course what they were looking for is the equivalent of the alchemists of centuries ago who wanted to turn lead into gold. They thought if you could just buy a lot of lead and wave your magic wand over it and turn it into gold, that would be a good way to make money. Well, this counseling shop was looking for the equivalent of turning lead into gold, and of course it didn't work. I could have told them, but they didn't ask me. Now, the interesting thing about this situation is that this is a very intelligent group of people that's come from all over the world. You've even got a lot of bright people from China where people tend to average out a little smarter. And the issue is very simple. It's a simple question. Why did that plausible idea fail? Just think about it for a minute. You've all been to fancy educational institutions. I'll bet you there's hardly one in the audience who knows why that thing failed. That's a pretty ridiculous demonstration I'm making. How can you not know that? It's one of the main activity of America. It's an obvious and important failure. Surely we can explain it. You have to have stayed awake in your freshman college courses to answer that question. But if you ask that question at a Department of Finance, at a leading place, the professors wouldn't answer it right. Now, I'm going to leave you that question because I want you perplexed. And now we'll go on to another issue. But that's one you should be able to answer. It shows how hard it is to be rational on something very simple. How hard it is, how many kind of crazy ideas people have and they don't work. You don't even know why they don't work, even though it's perfectly obvious if you've been properly educated. And by the way, my definition of being properly educated is being right when the professor is wrong. Anybody can spit back what the professor tells you. The trick is to know when he's right and when he's wrong. That's the properly educated person. And of course, they're frequently wrong, particularly in the soft sciences. In fact, if you look at a modern elite institution, it's fair to say that a lot of the faculty are a little crazy. It's so left-wing now in the humanities. And it's very peculiar. And that's another thing. Why should 90% of the college professors in the humanities be very left-wing? I leave that question for you, too. But it happens. And Another issue, of course, that's happened in the world of stock picking, where all this money and effort goes into trying to be rational, is that we've had a really horrible thing happen to the investment counseling class. And that is, these index funds have come along and they basically beat everybody. And not only that, the amount by which they beat everybody is roughly the amount of cost of running the operation and making the changes in investments. So you have a whole profession that is basically being paid for accomplishing practically nothing. This is very peculiar. This is not the case with bowel surgery or even the criminal defense bar in the law or something. They have a whole profession where the chosen activity they've selected, they can't do anything. Now, in the old days, the people in the profession always had some of this problem. And they rationalized as follows. We are saving our clients from the insurance salesman and the stockbroker, the standard stockbroker that serves the active trader. And they were saving people from the life insurance salesman and the hustling stockbroker who liked active trading. And I suppose in the sense that the investing class is still saving those people from an even worse fate. But it is very peculiar when a whole profession that works so hard and is so admirable, and the members of which we are delighted when they marry into our families, and they just can't do what the profession is really trying to do, which is get better than average results. How is that profession handling this terrible situation as index investing gets more and more popular, and including by a lot of fancy places? Well, I'll give you a very simple answer. They're handling it with denial. They have a horrible problem they can't fix, so they just treat it as non-existent. This is a very stupid way to handle a problem. Now, it may be good when you're thinking about your own death, which you can't fix, and just denial all the way to the end. But in all the practical fields of life, this problem thoroughly understood is half solved, or it's better coped with. So it's wrong to have all these people in just a state of denial and doing what they've always did year after year and hoping that the world will keep paying them for it, even though an unmanaged index is virtually certain to do better. It's a very serious problem. And think of how much New York, say, needs a flow of money from finance. Think what would happen to Manhattan if there weren't any fees for investment management or trading spreads and so on. And so it's a weird situation. And of course, it's unpleasant. Big investment counseling shops some of them shrink and some go out of business. And the value investors, of course, who many of I know because we came from that tradition, the value investors who are honorable are quitting. Boom, boom, boom. And what worked for them for years stopped working, and they're honorable people, they just quit. And they're also rich. So it makes it easy. But those who aren't rich have a hell of a problem. And it costs about $50,000 to say in Manhattan to send your kid to preschool, non-deductible. And that's just the start of an endless procession of years of vast expense. So if your game is money management, you have a serious problem. And I don't have any solution for this problem. I do think that index investing, if everybody did it, won't work. But for another considerable period, index investing is going to work better than active stock picking, where you try and know a lot. Now, at a place like Berkshire Hathaway or even the Daily Journal, we've done better than average. And now there's a question, why has that happened? Why has that happened? And the answer is pretty simple. We tried to do less. We never had the illusion we could just hire a bunch of bright young people and they would know more than anybody about canned soup and aerospace and utilities and so on and so on and so on. We never had that dream. We never thought we could get really useful information on all subjects, like Jen Kramer tends to have. And we always realized that if we worked very hard, we could find a few things where we were right, and that a few things were enough, and that was a reasonable expectation. That is a very different way to approach the process. And if you had asked Warren Buffett the same thing that this investment counseling did, give me your best idea this year, and you just followed Warren's best idea, you would find it worked beautifully. But he wasn't trying to know the whole. He would give you one or two stocks. He had more limited ambitions. I had a grandfather who was very useful to me, my mother's grandfather, and he was a pioneer, and he came out to Iowa with no money but youth and health and took it away from the Indians. He fought in the Black Hawk. He was a captain in the Black Hawk Wars, and he stayed there, and he bought cheap land, and he was aggressive and intelligent and so forth. And eventually, he was the richest man in the town and owned the bank and highly regarded in a huge family and a very happy life. And he had the attitude, having come out to Iowa when the land was not much more than $1 an acre, and having stayed there until that black topsoil created a modern, rich civilization and some of the best land in the world. His attitude was that in a favored life like his, when you were located in the right place, you just got a few opportunities if you lived to be about 90. And the trick in coming out well was seizing a few opportunities that were your fair share that came along when they did. And he told that story over and over again to the grandchildren who hung around him all summer. And my mother, who had no interest in money, remembered the story and told it to me. But I'm not my mother's natural imitator. And I knew Grandpa Hingham was right. And so I always knew from the very first, when I was a little boy, that the opportunities that were important that were going to come to me were few, and that the trick was to prepare myself for seizing the few that came. This is not the attitude they have at a big investment counseling thing. They think if they study a million things, they can know a million things. And of course, the result is almost nobody can outperform an index. Whereas I sit here with my Daily Journal stock, my Berkshire Hathaway stock, my holdings in Lilu's Asian fund, my Costco stock, and of course I'm outperforming everybody. And I'm 95 years old, and I practically never have a transaction. And the answer is I'm right and they're wrong. And that's why it's worked for me and not for them. And the question is, do you want to be more like me or more like them? The idea of diversification makes sense to a point. If you don't know what you're doing and you want the standard result and not be embarrassed, well, of course, you can widely diversify. Now, nobody's entitled to a lot of money for recognizing that because it's a truism. It's like knowing that 2 and 2 equals 4. But the investment professionals think they're helping you by arranging a diversification. An idiot could diversify a portfolio, or a computer for that matter. But the whole trick of the game is to have a few times when you know that something is better than average, and invest only where you have that extra knowledge. And then if you get just a few opportunities, that's enough. And what the hell does you care? You own 3 securities and J.P. Morgan Chase owns 100. What's wrong with owning a few securities? Warren always says if you lived in a growing town and you owned stock in 3 of the best enterprises in the town, isn't that diversified enough? The answer is, of course it is. They're all wonderful places. And that Fortune's formula, which got so famous, which was a formula to tell people how much to bet on each transaction if you had an edge And of course, the bigger your edge, the more close the transaction was to a certain winner, the more you should bet. And of course, there's mathematics behind it. But of course it's true. It's perfectly possible to buy only one thing because the opportunity is so great and such a cinch, or only two or three. So the whole idea of diversification when you're looking for excellence is totally ridiculous. It doesn't work. It gives you an impossible task. What fun is it to do an impossible task over and over again? I find it agony. Who would want to do it? And I don't see why. My father had a client. He was a lawyer in Omaha. He had a client whose husband had a little soap company. And the guy died, and my father sold the soap company. This woman was one of the richest people in town in the middle of the Depression. And what she had was a little soap company in a big mansion in Omaha's best neighborhood. And they sold the soap company. She had a mansion in the best neighborhood and $300,000. But $300,000 in 1930-something was an incredible amount of money. A little hamburger was a nickel, a big hamburger was a dime, and the all-you-can-eat cafe in Omaha would feed you all you needed to stay alive for 2 bits a day. I mean, $300,000. Well, she didn't hire an investment counselor. She didn't do anything. She's a wonderful old woman. And she just took that and she divided it into 5 chunks. And she bought 5 stocks. I remember 3 of them because I probated her estate. And it was, one of them was General Electric, one was Dow, one was DuPont, and I forget the other 2. And then she never changed those stocks. She never paid any advisor. She never did anything. And she bought some municipal bonds. She never spent her income. And she bought some municipal bonds from time to time with the incomes. By the time she died in the 50s, she had $1.5 million. No costs, no expenses. And I said, how did you decide to do that? And she said, well, she said, I thought electricity and chemistry were the coming things. You just chunked it all in and sat on her ass. I always liked that old woman. My kind of a girl. But it's rare. You know, but if you stop to think about it, think of all the expense and palaver that she didn't have to listen to, and all the trouble she avoided, and 0 costs. And of course, what people don't realize, because they're so mathematically illiterate, is if you make 5% and pay 2 of it to your advisors, you're not losing 40% of your future. You're losing 90%. Because over a long period of time, that little difference causes a 90% disadvantage to you. So it's hugely important for somebody who's a long-term holder not to be paying a big annual toll out of the performance. And of course, there are a few big-time advisors now who are using indexation very heavily. And of course, they're prospering mightily. And of course, every time they get somebody, it's just agony for the rest of the investment counseling business. And this is a very serious problem. And I think these people who are used to winning as old-time value investors who are now just quitting the profession, that's a very understandable thing to do. I regard it as more noble than staying in, with, playing along with the denial. It's an interesting problem. You can see I'm not trying to make your morning. I'm just trying to describe things the way they are. But this business, why does Li Lu succeed so mightily? Well, partly he's sort of a Chinese Warren Buffett. That really helps. And partly he's fishing in China, not in this oversearched, overpopulated, highly competitive American market, and there's still pockets of ignorance and lassitude in China that gave him some unusual opportunities. The first rule in fishing has always been fish where the fish are. And the second rule of fishing has always been don't forget rule number 1. And Li Lu just went where the fishing was good. And the rest of us are like cod fishermen who are trying to catch cod where the fish have been fished out. It doesn't matter how much you work when there's that much competition. Every little idea I see in the world, some are going after. I sat once on an investment committee at the University of Michigan, and in came one of their successful investors, located in London. And what had this investor done in London? He decided to invest in sub-Saharan Africa. And the only marginal securities were a few banks that traded in the pink sheets. So he would buy very tiny quantities of these banks. And every time some poor person got tired of having the money in the mattress and put it in a bank, he did a little better. And of course, he made a lot of money. Nobody else was investing in little tiny banks in Africa. But the niche was soon filled. What the hell do you do for encore after you put your clients' money in a bunch of little tiny banks in sub-Saharan Africa? The niche gets filled quickly. And how many wonderful niches are there going to be when some guy in London is buying all these tiny little bank stocks in Africa? It's hard. And then, if you take the modern world, where people are trying to teach you how to come in and trade actively in stocks, well, I regard that as roughly equivalent to trying to induce a bunch of young people to start off on heroin. It is really stupid. And when you're already rich, to make your money by encouraging people to get rich by trading. And then there are people on the TV, another wonderful place. And they say, I have this book that will teach you how to make 300% a year. And all you have to do is pay for shipping, and I will mail it to you. How likely is it that a person who had suddenly found a way to make 300% a year would be trying to sell books on the internet to you? And it's ridiculous. And yet, I've described modern commerce. And the people that do this all day think they're useful citizens. The advertising agents that invent the lingo. And so in insurance, they say, the two people who shifted from Geico to the Glotz Insurance Company saved $400 each. What they don't tell you is there are only two such people in the whole United States, and they were both nuts. But they mislead you on purpose. And I get tired of it. And I don't think it's right that we deliberately mislead people as much as we do. Let me tell you another story that I think is an interesting one about the modern life. But this goes back to a different time. And this man has this wonderful horse. And it's just a marvelous horse. It's got an easy gait and good looking and everything. It just works wonderfully. But also occasionally just gets so he's dangerous and vicious and causes enormous damage and trouble and breaks arms and legs for his rider and so on. And he goes to the vet and says, what can I do about this horse? And the vet says, that's a very easy problem and I'm glad to help you. He says, what should I do? And the man says, the next time your horse is behaving well, sell it. Well, think of how immoral that is. And haven't I just described what private equity has to do? When private equity has to sell something that's really troublesome, they hire an investment banker. And what does the investment banker do? He makes a projection. You can't, I have never seen such expertise in my whole life as is created in making projections in investment banking. There is no business so lousy it can't get a wonderful projection. But is that a great way to make a living, to have phony projections and use it to make money out of people you look right into the eyes of? I would say no. And by and large, Warren and I, we never tried to make money out of stupidity of our dumb buyers. We tried to make money by buying. And if we were selling horse shit, we didn't want to pretend it was a cure for arthritis. And And, and, and I think it's better to go through life our way instead of theirs. And I think it's always been this way. I think there's always been chicanery. Think of the carnivals, the carny operator. Think how much trickery there is in a carny operation. And people just seek out the weaknesses of their fellow man and take advantage. And you have to get wise enough so you avoid them all. And you can't avoid them if they're in your family. I have no solution to that one. But where you have a fair choice, there are just so many people that should be avoided. My father had this best friend and client, and he also had this other client who was a big blowhard, and he was always working for the big blowhard, and he wasn't ever working for his wonderful client whom I admired. And I said, "Why do you do this?" And he said, "Charlie, you idiot." He says, "The big blowhard is an endless source of legal troubles. He's always in trouble, overreaching and misbehaving and so forth. Whereas Grant McFadden treats everybody right, the employees, the customers, everything. And he gets involved with some psychotic, he walks over there and makes a graceful exit immediately. So a man like that doesn't need a lawyer." And my father was trying to teach me something, and it really worked. I spent my whole life trying to be like Grant McFadden. And I want to tell you, it works. It really works. Peter Coffin is always telling me if the crooks only knew how much money you could make by being honest, they'd all behave differently. Warren has a wonderful saying I like. He says, "If you take the high road, it's never crowded." and it's worked. Take the Daily Journal Corporation. We made quite a few millions of dollars out of the foreclosure boom because we published legal notices and we dominated the publication of foreclosure notices in the worst real estate depression in the history of modern times. And we could have raised our prices at the time and made more tens of millions of dollars, but we didn't do it. You know, when your fellow citizens are losing their damn houses in the worst recession, Charlie Munger, billionaire, raises prices. If it would look lousy on the front page of the paper for people around the honest way, should you do it? And the answer is no, of course not. Particularly when Warren always said it's probably always a mistake to marry for money, and it's really stupid if you're already rich. and it's really stupid when you're already rich to get a reputation of being a total no-goodnik. Rick Guerin always loved the story about the guy who had been a total miscreant all his life, and he died, and the minister said, "Now is the time in the funeral ceremony when somebody says something nice about the deceased." And nobody came forward, and nobody came forward, and nobody came forward. Finally, one guy stood up, and he said, "Well," he said, "his brother was worse." Well, you can laugh, but there are people like that. When Harry Cohn died here, the saying was everybody went to the funeral to make sure he was dead. and so there are a few simple truths that really work. And when it gets to this difficult business the Daily Journal is in, I would say it is a real pleasure to be serving these courts and agencies. They need the automation. Other people are trying to take advantage of them in ways that we aren't. And we're struggling against the odds, a little tiny company. And we're taking a lot of territory. It's slow going, but the prospects are good. And of course, the nice thing about being rich is it doesn't matter if it's a little slow. And how did we get rich? Well, we remembered Grandpa Ingham, and when one of the few opportunities came along, we reached out and seized it. Think of how your life works. In my life, to give another example, the Mungers would have twice the assets they now have if I hadn't made one mistake of omission back in the 1970s. And really stupid. And I blew an opportunity that would have doubled my present net worth. That is a normal life. You get one or two. And how things work out, it's the basis. We all know people that are out married, their spouses are so much better. Think what a good decision that was for them. And what a lucky decision, way more important than money. And a lot of them did it when they were young, they stumbled into it. Now, you don't have to stumble into it. You can be very careful. A lot of people are wearing signs, danger, danger, do not touch, and people just charge right ahead. That's a mistake. Well, you can laugh, but it's still a horrible mistake. And it's been fun for the people on this board to know one another and work on these oddball things and to handle life's vicissitudes. Of course, it's very peculiar that we're so old. I mean, imagine a place where Gary Wilcox is one of the young men. And his wife is still a golf champion, but that's not because she's good when she's old. I mean, yeah, it's an amazing group, and that's an interesting example, too. Imagine being as old and as impaired as I am and having a pretty good time. How does that happen? Well, that is another story. I can tell a couple of other stories, too, because you like stories. Here's an apocryphal story that is very instructive. A young man comes to visit Mozart. And he says, Mozart, I want to write symphonies. And Mozart says, how old are you? And the man says, I'm 23. And Mozart says, you're too young to write symphonies. And he says, but Mozart, he says, you were writing symphonies when you were 10 years old. And Mozart says, yes, but I wasn't asking other people how to do it. Now there's another Mozart story. Here's the greatest musical talent maybe that ever lived. And what was his life like? Well, he was bitterly unhappy and he died young. That's the life of Mozart. What the hell did Mozart do to screw it up? To make himself, well, he did two things that are guaranteed to create a lot of misery. He overspent his income scrupulously. That's number one. That is really stupid. And the other thing was he was full of jealousies and resentments. If you'll overspend your income and be full of jealousy and resentments, you can have a lousy, unhappy life and die young. All you've got to do is learn from Mozart. You can also learn from that young man who was asking Mozart how to write symphony. The truth of the matter is that not everybody can learn everything. Some people are way the hell better. And of course, no matter how hard you try, there's always some guy that achieves more, some guy or gal. And my answer is, so what? Does any of us need to be the very top of the whole world? It's ridiculous. And another thing that people do that I regard as amazing is they build these enormous mausoleums. I think they figure they want people to walk by that mausoleum and say, gosh, I wish I were in there. Anyway, you can see we've had some fun as we go along, and it's worked so well, but if you actually figure out how many decisions were made in the history of the Daily Journal Corporation or the history of Berkshire Hathaway, it wasn't very many per year that were meaningful. It's a game of being there all the time and recognizing the rare opportunity when it comes and recognizing that a normal human allotment is to not have very many. Now, there's a very confident bunch of people who sell securities who act as though they've got an endless supply of wonderful opportunities. Well, those people are the equivalent of the racetrack tout. They're not even respectable. It's not a good way to live your life, to pretend to know a lot of stuff you don't know and pretend to furnish you a lot of opportunities you're not furnishing. And my advice to you is avoid those people, but not if you're running a stock brokerage firm. You need them. But it's not the right way to make money. And this business of controlling the costs and living simply, and that was the secret. How much money? Warren and I had tiny little bits of money. We always underspent our incomes, and we invested, and if you live long enough, you end up rich. It's not very complicated. And now there is a part of life which is, how do you scramble out of your mistakes without them costing too much? And we've done some of that too. And if you look at Berkshire Hathaway, think of its founding businesses: a doomed department store, a doomed New England textile company, and a doomed trading stamp company. Out of that came Berkshire Hathaway. Now, we handled those losing hands pretty well, and we bought into them very cheaply. But of course, the success came from changing our ways and getting into the better businesses. And it isn't that we were so good at doing things that were difficult. We were good at avoiding things that were difficult, finding things that are easy. By the way, when we bought the Daily Journal, that was easy. And what we're doing now in this software business is difficult. But due to the accident of these good associations and the fact that these old colleagues have lived so long, we're doing pretty well in the new business. It has potential. And it's fun to do. And how many declining newspapers have hundreds of millions of marketable securities lying around and a new business with some promise? We're like the last of the Mohegans.
It's for Jerry.
Oh, he's giving it to somebody important. Well, I'll take some questions now. We need some system of order.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Good
Jerry,
morning.
Somebody want to point to these people? All right, go ahead.
All right. Good morning, Mr. Munger. Happy Valentine to you. And we wish you a great health until Berkshire splits shares. My name is An Lee, and I'm from Hanoi, Vietnam. In the book Outsiders, William Thorndike lists 8 CEOs that achieve superlative performance to the S&P 500 and their peers. So other than Mr. Buffett and Mr. Murphy, did Berkshire invest in all other 6 companies of the other CEOs? And if not, why?
I didn't get that.
So I think...
I just didn't understand the question.
So
Rick,
my question is, William Thorndike lists 8 CEOs, and along with them is 8 companies, and 2 of them are Berkshire Hathaway and Capital Cities. So I want to ask that among the other 6 companies, did Berkshire invest in them at one time? And if you don't invest, if you didn't invest in one of the other 6 companies, what are the reasons for that?
Well, I can't answer that question. I don't know the other 6 companies. But I would say, generally speaking, as things have gotten tougher, we've been better at sitting on our ass with what we have than we have in buying new ones. It's been hard to buy new ones. We haven't bought a whole company of any size since we bought the truck stop operator. So if you're having trouble at the present time with anything, join the club.
Good morning.
Yeah.
Could you please comment on proposed legislation in Washington to restrict or tax share buybacks?
To tax whom? What?
Share buybacks.
Oh. Well. Rick tells a story about an old Irishman that used to steal from the church and drunk all the time. And when he was dying, the priest asked him to renounce the devil. And he said, I can't do that because in my condition I shouldn't offend anybody. And I don't think I should. If you get me started on politicians, I may be impolitic. So let's go to another subject.
Hi, Mr. Munger. Thank you for taking our questions today. My name is Paul Smith from Los Altos. My question is about commercial banks. Many of us here, I suspect, have tailgated you and Mr. Buffett into some wonderful banking investments. Thank you for that. My question is about smaller banks. If you look at banks with assets greater than about $1 billion in the U.S. and go up and sort of stop at the super regional level, there's about 250 of those banks. And my question is that a hunting ground that you would think, applying the principles of value investing, that is likely to maybe yield one or two, great businesses at a
Well, thank you for answering that question. The answer is yes.
Oh, I had a second question, or a second part to that. Can I?
Go ahead. Yeah. The next question, whatever it is.
Right over here, Charlie. So you and Warren have advocated for decades that CEOs should tell shareholders everything they need to know to value a business. From visiting and calling courthouses around the country, I've personally seen the success that you've had being awarded contracts against larger competitors for JTI. However, your opaqueness regarding contracts that have been awarded but not completed leaves a wide range that an estimated value could fall for. So if a shareholder is unwilling to cold call 50 courts around the country to find these contracts that haven't been accepted yet, could you please provide a little bit of detail for us shareholders as far as the willingness for courts to accept these? Have you had any contracts that haven't been accepted after you put in the work?
We've got contracts or possible contracts in every stage you can imagine. And it's very complicated. And I don't purport to understand each one because I've trusted Jerry and the people who are doing it. But generally speaking, I can see that the trend is favorable. But more than that, I can only say you would be horrified if you watched it up close, how difficult it is. It's difficult. But in spite of its difficulties, we're doing pretty well. But we haven't got any magic wand. If you read all the reports, if I read all the reports in great detail and spent all my effort trying to understand it, I wouldn't understand it very well. So I think your chances are very poor.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Charlie?
Yeah.
One of my favorite lines from you is you want to hire the guy with the IQ of 130 that thinks it's 120, and the guy with an IQ of 150 who thinks it's 170 will just kill you.
You must be thinking about Elon Musk.
How do you assess someone when making a hiring decision?
The question is what? Of course I want the guy who understands his limitations instead of the guy who doesn't. On the other hand, I've learned something terribly important in life. I learned that from Howard Amundsen. You know what he used to say? Never underestimate the man who overestimates himself. These weird guys who overestimate themselves occasionally knock it right out of the park. And that is a very unhappy part of modern life. But I've learned to adjust to it. I have no alternative. It happens all the time. But I don't want my personal life to be a bunch of guys who are living in a state of delusion, who happen occasionally to win big. I want the prudent person.
Hi, Charlie. I'm Philip from the Philippines. Early part of your talk, you mentioned about Li Lu. What did you see in him versus other investors in China? Because in his biography, it looks like he's more of an outsider. And how similar or different he is versus Ted Combs or Ted Weisler. And can you comment, because last year you gave an interview with him in China. Is there any reason why you gave that interview last year?
Well, I did it because he asked me. And I sometimes do that. I'm foolish that way. And I said what I believed when they asked me the questions. The answer is Li Lu is not a normal. He's the Chinese Warren Buffett. He's very talented. And of course I've enjoyed backing him. But it's interesting that way. I'm 95 years old. I've given Munger money to some outsider to run once in 95 years. And it's Li Lu, of course, who's hit it out of the park. It's very remarkable, but it's also pretty picky. And of course, once I've got Li Lu, if I'm comparing to him, who else am I going to pick? And by the way, that's a good way to make decisions, and that's what we do. If we've got one thing we can do more of, we're not interested in anything that's not better than that. That simplifies life a great deal, because there aren't that many people better than Li Lu. So I just sit. It's amazing how intelligent it is to spend some time just sitting. A lot of people are way too active.
Good morning, Mr. Munger. You said in the past that you expect the U.S. to adopt a single-payer health care system, or Medicare for all, the next time that Democrats control all three branches of government.
I do, yes.
What will this mean for health insurers, hospitals, and medical device companies?
Well, it'll be a hell of a mess. It'll still be a big business, but it will be a hell of a mess. And the existing system is so overexpensive and overcomplicated and has so much unnecessary cost, so much unnecessary overtreatment of the dying, so much overtreatment of items that would be best left alone, so much unnecessary expense. Yet on the other hand, it's the best system there is in the world in terms of the quality at the top. So it's a very complicated subject, but it's a hell of a mess. I find it demoralizing to see. In Singapore, they spend 20% of what we spend in America on medical care, and their system is way better. And what they're doing is just the most elemental common sense. But of course, it was created by one Chinese guy who was in control. Of course, it's more intelligent than the outcome of our political process. That Singapore system was created by the Lee Kuan Yew. Of course it works better. But to have it cost 20% and work better in an advanced place like Singapore. So there's a lot to be demoralized about in terms of the potential of our medical care system. And of course, it isn't that our politicians are good at fixing systems like that. So if you don't like it now, I confidently predict you won't like it later either.
Still on your left, Charlie. My name's JD. I'm from Phoenix. Charlie, I read a lot of the Stoic philosophers last year, Epictetus, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius.
Well, I can see why you would.
Yeah.
There's a lot to be Stoic about.
Agreed. And as I gleaned lessons from them, there was one name that kept coming to mind, and that is Munger. So I wonder, can you talk about...
Some people think Marcus Aurelius was all right.
Can you talk to me about the influence that the Stoics had on you and some of your favorite advice from them?
A lot have had a lot on me, including Epictetus, who started as a slave. No, I like those old Stoics. And part of the secret of a long life that's worked as well as mine is not to expect too much of human nature. It's almost bound to be a lot of defects and problems. And to have your life full of seething resentments and hatreds, it's counterproductive. You're punishing yourself and not fixing the world. Can you think of anything much more stupid than trying to fix the world in a way that ruins yourself and doesn't fix the world? It's pretty stupid. I just don't do it. I have a rule for politicians, and it's a stoic rule, and I quit claiming to use it. This worked so well for me. I always reflect that the politicians are never so bad you don't live to want them back. When I was young, the California legislature was full of small-time insurance brokers and lawyers looking for an unfair advantage. And they were being entertained with restaurants and with prostitutes and bars by racetracks and liquor distributors and so on and so on. Fade in, fade out. We have a different kind of a legislature now. And I just want all those old crooks and lobbyists and prostitutes back. Oh, you laugh, but you young people, you're going to live to wish we could have that Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump were immortal.
Good morning, Mr. Munger. Raj Brahma from the San Francisco Bay Area. We all know you're an avid reader. Could you share a reading recommendation for us, potentially a new one, that maybe fundamentally change your viewpoint on something?
Well, there are very few 95-year-olds that are changing their viewpoint on things. But I do find that there are amusing anecdotes and so forth that I occasionally read and like. But I like the old anecdotes pretty well, too. Like that one about the vet and the horse. It's so obvious, some of these pithy stories. The storytelling really works to get messages around. One of the interesting things is look at our modern politicians and then think about Abraham Lincoln. Who in our modern politician reminds you of Abraham Lincoln? In either party. Lincoln at one time was hired by some guy whose partner had died, leaving practically no money and wife and 3 children. And he owed some money to his surviving partner, and the surviving partner came to Lincoln and said, I want you to collect this money. And Lincoln said to this guy, he said, well, he says, you look like an enterprising fellow who can get that much money back pretty easily through a little effort. And if you want to wring a little money out of this poor widow and her 3 children, you'll have to get a different kind of lawyer. Does that remind you of any of our modern politicians? That was Abraham Lincoln. What a story. No wonder he's remembered. And you know who deserves the credit for Abraham Lincoln and never gets it? Is his stepmother. Abraham Lincoln was the child of 2 illiterates. But the stepmother, who his father just married in desperation to help raise the children, she took a shine to Lincoln and saw he was bookish, and she helped him all the way along. I am going to donate a picture of that stepmother eventually to a particular place because I admire what that stepmother accomplished in life. Imagine being responsible more than any other person for the life of Abraham Lincoln. Next.
Charlie, my name is Yang Lee from New York, and thank you so much. And I want to say first, happy Valentine's Day. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and secret to success to life, for business, for investment. That is tremendous value for myself and many of our attendees here. My question is about intellectual property, because you're a lawyer by training. Given the complicated landscape in this field, is there a better way to share intellectual property across nations, especially in the case of Huawei? Is the bigger fight or the better legal framework to handle intellectual properties? Thank you.
Well, you know, I don't know that much about the world of intellectual property. I've made my way in insurance and furniture stores and little legal newspapers and so on, and so other people are good at intellectual and good at intellectual property. I'm good at avoiding subjects, which I'm not good at. And one of them is intellectual property. I'm not surprised that the Chinese are stealing a little intellectual property. We Americans did it all the time. We stole Dickens' work. We didn't copy it. We just reprinted his copyrighted stuff. We stole the technology from the English textile manufacturers. You know, it isn't as though people haven't been pretty aggressive about wanting to know other people's ideas. This is an old problem. I do think that allowing intellectual property to have these profits is desirable, but the exact complexities of how you handle it, I don't spend much time thinking about.
Hi, Charlie, and thank you for being here today and sharing your knowledge with us. In last year's Daily Journal meeting, you talked about one of the 5 aces of a money manager was a long runway.
Yes.
I'm young and have at least, hopefully, a 40-year runway ahead of me. How
are your legs?
I passed my physical with flying colors, so thanks a lot. I'd like to compound my money at the highest rate and then give most of it away at the end. Which money managers would you recommend besides you and Warren? Thank you.
Well, I just said I've only hired one myself in a lifetime. I don't think that makes me an expert. Although I must say that one did work out rather well. No, I can't help you. Everybody would like to have some money manager that would make him rich. Think of how of course we all would want that. I would like to be able to turn lead into gold, but it's hard. It's very hard. And if you're finding it difficult, that just shows you understand it. Next.
Charlie and Peter Kaufman, I don't have a question. I just want to thank you both for putting together Poor Charlie's Almanac. It has been an incredibly foundational book in my life and has really helped inflect my thinking on many different things. So thank you both very much for your work on that.
Well, it was Peter Kaufman's idea. He did the whole damn thing. And he paid for it himself, being a rich and eccentric man. And I just wish there was one change in Peter Kaufman. Peter Kaufman has made me adored in India and China. I wish the hell he could do more for me in Los Angeles. The Chinese version of Poor Charlie's Almanac has been pirated enormously in China, totally pirated. But the legal sales are, 340,000 or something. Peter's made me very popular in China, but he does nothing for me in Los Angeles.
Hi, Charlie. Question for you over here. You've paraphrased Ben Graham in saying that good ideas are wonderful, but you can suffer terribly if you overdo them. How do you balance that against the risk that you potentially forego an opportunity altogether or are late to enter into an opportunity for fear of that materializing?
Well, the problem is thoroughly understood as half solved. The minute you point out there's a big tension between good ideas that get overdone so much they're dangerous and good ideas that still have a lot of runway ahead. Once you have that construct in your head and start classifying opportunities into one category or the other, you've got the problem half solved. You don't need me. You've already figured it out. You've got to be aware of both potentialities and the tensions.
Hi, Charlie.
Yeah.
My name is Jason, here from Toronto, Canada. And in your letter on Berkshire's past and future, you wrote about the principles that have made Berkshire successful over the years. My question is, why is it that Berkshire's organizational principles as a holding company have not been copied more by others, given its incredible success and track record? Thank you.
Well, it's a good question. I think the main reason is it looks impossible. If you were in Procter & Gamble with its culture and its bureaucracy, and you sat down, how can I make Procter & Gamble more like Berkshire Hathaway? It would go immediately to the too hard pile. It's just too hard. There's too much momentum. But you raise, by your question, a very interesting thing that deserves more attention than it gets. One of the reasons that Berkshire has been so successful is there's practically nobody at headquarters. We have almost no corporate bureaucracy. We have a few internal auditors who go out from there and check this or that. But basically, we have no bureaucracy. Having no bureaucracy is a huge advantage if the people who are running it are sensible people. Think of how poorly all of us have behaved in big bureaucracy, even though we have a lot of talent, because we couldn't change anything. So bureaucracy has a standard bunch of evils and a standard bunch of stupid wastes and so forth. And avoiding it is hugely important. And of course, the tendency of successful places, particularly successful governmental places, is to have more and more bureaucracy. And of course, it's terribly counterproductive. And of course, the bureaucracy, the individual bureaucrats, they're benefiting from more assistance, more meetings, more this, more that. So what looks like poison to us from the outside, because the decisions are so terrible, looks wonderful for them. It's opportunity. And I've just described the great tragedy of modern life. Modern life creates successful bureaucracy, and successful bureaucracy breeds failure and stupidity. How could it be otherwise? That's the big tension of modern life. And some of these places that go into a stupid bureaucracy and fire a third of the people and then the place works better, they're doing the Lord's work, but you wouldn't think so if you were working there. But there's a lot of horror and waste in bureaucracy, and it's inevitable. It's as natural as old age and death. With that cheerful thought, I can go on to the next one.
Hi, Charlie. My name is Frank. At this moment right now, I'm researching what makes partnerships successful, such as you and Warren. And in particular, I'm researching personality psychology. I was wondering what your thoughts are on that, if you have any. Thank you.
Well, yes, I'll tell you what makes a partnership successful. Two talented people working well together. Of course, that works better.
Good morning. My name is Matthew Peterson. Matthew Peterson from Manhattan Beach. Mr. Munger, in the past you've praised the significance of cultures at firms like Glenair, Hewitt, and Costco. What are your views on the culture at Daily Journal, and in particular, Journal Technologies? And similar to your Berkshire 50-year essay, can you share a multi-decade vision for Journal Technologies? Thank you.
Well, you got to remember that I was old when General Technologies came into being. I guess had a weak moment, and Warren and Garen talked me into it. And it worked because Jerry took a hold of it and worked miracles. So I don't deserve much credit. It's Garen and Salzman who are responsible for Journal Technology. I just clap. I'm good at clapping.
Hello, Mr. Munger. I'm on your right. You speak about the importance of fishing in waters with ample fish. If you were starting out today, what sea would you be fishing in, other than in China, of course?
Well, other than China, but if there's one good place in the world, that's more than my share. There are others, I'm sure, but it's hard for me to believe that anything could be better for the Mungers than China. 'Cause I can't help you. I've solved my problem. You'll have to solve yours. By the way, the water's fine in China. And some very smart people are wading in. And in due course, I think more will wade in. The great companies of China are cheaper than the great companies in the United States.
Hi, Mr. Munger. My friend Mikel and I were from Barcelona, and I have a question for you regarding long-term investment and compound interest. So I tried to remember if it was you or Einstein that said that compound interest was the strongest force on Earth. And in the last few years, with the very low interest rates out there, it's been difficult to find opportunities for having a long-term compound interest-based strategy. So beyond investing in Berkshire, value investing, or index funding, where would you invite us to find opportunities for long-term investment where compound interest is really that force?
Well, my advice for a seeker of compound interest that works ideally is to reduce your expectations, because I think it's going to be tougher for a while. And it helps to have realistic expectations, makes you less crazy. But I think that, you know, they say that common stocks from the aftermath of the Great Depression, which was the worst in the English-speaking world in hundreds of years, to the present time, maybe an index has produced 10%, but that's pre-inflation. After inflation, it may be 7% or something. And the difference between 7 and 10 in terms of its consequences are just hugely dramatic over that long period of time. And if that 7 in real terms that may have been achieved starting in a perfect period through the greatest boom in history, starting now, it could well be 3% or 2% in real terms. I mean, it's not unthinkable you'd have 5% returns and 3% inflation or some ghastly consequences like that. And so the ideal way to cope with that is to say if that happens, I can have a happy life. Because why shouldn't you be happy in spite of the fact that the civilization wasn't quite as easy as it was for my generation? And now beyond that, when it gets more difficult, how should you do it? Well, the answer is because it's going to be very difficult, you should work at it. And if all that gets you is 6% for a lifetime of work instead of 5%, you should be cheerful about it. If you want to hit it out of the park easily, you should talk to Jim Cramer.
Hi there, Alex Rubalcava over on the left here. Hi. Building on the question about the corporate culture at Daily Journal Corporation, it's great to see a new board member. And I was wondering if we could ask the other board members about the long-term succession plan for the board.
I don't think we want to go to another speaker.
Hi. I'm curious, has the Berkshire Hathaway equity portfolio outperformed the S&P over the last 5 or 10 years? And if it has not, why wouldn't Berkshire just invest in the S&P for its equity portfolio?
I think Warren, was after all a mere boy of 89, thinks that Berkshire can do a little better than the S&P. From this point. I don't think many people can, but he may be right about himself and the team he has in place. It won't be by huge margins. That I confidently predict.
Hi, Mr. Munger. Andrew Pogue over here on your right. Just a question on how you think about downside protection and how do you know when to exit an investment?
Well, you're not talking to a great exiter. My Berkshire I bought in 1966. My Costco I've been a good picker, but other people know more about exiting. I'm trying never to have to exit. So you're talking to the wrong. I think there's working styles of investments that work well with constant exits. It just hasn't happened to have been my forte. So I'm no good at exits. I don't like even looking for exits. I'm looking for holds. Think of the pleasure I've got from watching Costco march ahead. Such an utter meritocracy, and it does so well. Why would I trade that experience for a series of transactions that made me a little... First place, I'd be less rich, not more, after taxes. In the second place, it's a much less satisfactory life than rooting for people I like and admire. So I say find Costco's, not good exits.
Good morning, Charlie. You mentioned in an interview with CNBC in May 2018, Berkshire is a little bit too restrained on buying more Apple stock. Do you still believe so? Do you have any new comments on
Berkshire
Apple?
is what?
Berkshire is too restrained on buying more Apple stock.
Its own stock, you mean?
Apple.
Apple. Oh,
Yes.
Apple. Oh.
Yeah. Do you still believe so? And do you have any more comments, new comments on Apple?
No, I don't think the world would be improved by more comments from me on Apple. You know, I'm a very opinionated man and I know a lot, but I don't know everything. I like Apple, but I don't have the feeling that I'm the big expert.
Good morning, Mr. Munger. My name is JC. I am 11 years old and I come from China. My question is also
Well,
about...
you're certainly welcome here.
My question is also about Apple. So last year you said that you wish you had more of Apple stock, but now its price has declined by a lot. So what is your opinion about its moat or the competitive advantage? Why do you think it has declined? Thank you very much.
Well, I don't know why Apple stock is going up or down. I know enough about it, so I admire the place, but I don't know enough to have any big opinion about why it's going up and down recently. Part of our secret is that we don't attempt to know a lot of things. I have a pile on my desk that solves most of my problems. It's called the too hard pile. And I just keep shifting things to the too hard pile. And every once in a while, an easy decision comes along and I make it. That's my system. Everything was the too hard pile, except for a few easy decisions which I make promptly.
Hi, Charlie. Sam from Chicago on your left. When you're assessing the quality of a business, do you place more emphasis on quantitative metrics such as return on invested capital or qualitative ideas like brand strength or quality of management?
Well, we pay attention to qualitative metrics and we also pay attention to other factors. Generally, we like to pay attention to whatever is important in the particular situation, and that varies from situation to situation. We're just trying to have that uncommon sense I'm talking about. And part of our uncommon sense is just to refer a lot of stuff to the too hard pile.
The simple life is the obvious right answer, but most of America ends up like Mozart, in debt and overspending. How do you maintain the discipline to live the simple life in the face of all these other temptations?
I was born this way.
Good morning, Mr. Munger. My name is, on the left,
My name is Benjamin Jorvich, and I'm an engineer at BYD, and I was interested to hear your perspective on the current state of infrastructure in the U.S. and just some areas of growth that you might see in the future for infrastructure. Thank you.
Well, I think infrastructure will be a big deal, practically everybody. In China, where BYD is so active, and by the way, the Daily Journal owns some BYD, but BYD is going to be huge in electric vehicles. They're already huge, and they're going to be much more huge. And then they're going to be huge in monorails, which is also a business whose time has come. And they're also huge in these lithium batteries, and the lithium batteries are being improved and materially improved. And the place is full of fanatics. And by the way, they're a big supplier to Apple and Huawei. And they're a very satisfactory supplier to those things. So I am terribly impressed with BYD. It's been one of the real pleasures of my life to Wan Chuanfu was the 8th son of a peasant. An older brother, recognizing a genius had been born into the family, he just gave up everything in life to nurture that little brother genius. Now that's Confucianism. And by the way, Confucianism will do a lot better for civilization than the Ford Foundation did. You know, Confucianism with a strong family ethos like that is a really constructive thing. And Confucianism partly created BYD. That older brother of Wan Chuanfu's was a hero. And of course, what Wan Chuanfu has done is a miracle. And of course, that was a venture capital type investment. We bought marketable securities, not Berkshire, but Liu did, and it's been a wonderful investment, and it's been a very admirable company, and I like being part of something that's inventing better lithium batteries and better monorails and so on and so on. So if you work for BYD, you're a very fortunate person, and you're going to have a wonderful life watching and participating. You could hardly have a better employer. At least if you like demanding achievement in 80-hour weeks.
Hi, Mr. Munger. Thank you for taking all of our questions. You mentioned earlier that when you had an opportunity to raise prices, you didn't want to raise them during the Great Recession because it didn't seem right for Charlie Munger to be raising prices on people that were losing their houses. So I wanted to thank you for that as well. And I wanted to ask you about
Nobody else ever has.
I wanted to ask you about the causes of the Great Recession, specifically the credit ratings agencies. In your 24 standard causes of human misjudgment, I think they hit them pretty much all. The Pavlovian Association,
well, you're right
denial.
You're right about that. The financial behavior in our leading financial institutions was inexcusably awful. And when other people were making money in a disreputable, stupid fashion, everybody piled in because they didn't want somebody else to be making money, and they're not participating. The standards in lending, the standards in managing, it was disgusting intellectually, disgusting morally, and of course it caused a whirlwind that could have taken the whole civilization down into a Great Depression. And that's a pretty major sin. And none of those people have been punished. It's unusual. I agree so thoroughly with Elizabeth Warren, but it was wrong to have that big a mess and have nobody punished.
Mr. Munger, I've written a blueprint for a nonprofit credit ratings agency. I'm not going to ask for your money because I understand you're invested in Moody's and you probably do not want to give money to a nonprofit that's going to spend some time possibly criticizing Moody's ratings. But I'd love to get your feedback. It's only 10 pages. I'll hand it to your people after the event. Thank you.
What is the feedback on?
The feedback on a blueprint that I've written for a nonprofit credit ratings agency. It would be a verifier of ratings issued by Moody's.
That is a very... Things that far out I usually leave to other people. You know, and not because Berkshire Hathaway owns a big chunk of one of the credit rating agencies, but I can see why the existing situation would draw you draw your concern. But there's some human problems I don't want to bother with. And you have just produced one. But you're right, it wasn't perfect.
Hi, Mr. Munger. My name is William Andresian, down the middle. I'm a student at the University of Southern California, and my question relates to the country's national debt. We've just recently passed $22 trillion, and our debt to GDP is above 100% now, at a time when our GDP may be near a peak and interest rates may be rising. And it seems to me that politicians seem fine running a deficit because they won't be there when the crisis comes, and consumers are happy to take a deficit because it's better to consume now than tomorrow. My question is, do you think that there's something we can do about this, and if so, what should be done? Or is human psychology such that until the crisis is upon us, it's hard to imagine anything gets done? Thank you so much.
Well, that's a very interesting question. The whole science of economics had no idea 15 years ago that it would be possible to print money on the present scale and get so awash in internal debt as we have. And certainly in a place like Japan, which is way more extreme, nobody dreamed that was possible. And the people who did dream it was possible, and they were few, they would not have predicted 20 years of stasis in spite of everything the Japanese did, which was very extreme. There's a lot that's peculiar in what we're doing, and eventually, if you try and solve all your problems by printing money, there'll be some disaster. And when it's coming and how bad it will be, nobody knows. Nobody dreamed 15 years ago we could do as much as we have now with this little bad consequence. And so Churchill used to say that Clement Attlee had a lot to be modest about. Well, that's the way I feel about the economics profession. They have a lot to be modest about. They thought they knew a lot that turned out not to be so. And there was a Greek philosopher that said, no man steps in the same river twice. You know, the river is different the second time he comes in, and so is the man. And that's the way with economics. It's not like physics where the same damn principles are going to apply. You do the same damn thing at a different time and you get a different result. It's complicated. And of course you're raising a very important question. And of course, nobody really knows the answer. Who knows how much of this we can get by with? My personal bet is that these democracies will eventually borrow too much and cause some real troubles. I don't know when.
Hi, Charlie. I'm Jonathan Lowe. I'm from Shenzhen, China. I do have a quick question. Basically, a lot of people ask you about how you determine what investment or deal to do, and you tell people that you can do this fairly quickly. My question is, how do you tell, like, for example, when you look at your money manager or a management company that you're investing in, if they have the right character or the right integrity, how long does that take you to do that, and what are some traits that you look for? Thank you.
Well, now that I find Lulu, I don't look for anybody else. So I'm the wrong person. What are my chances I'm going to get somebody better than Lulu? So it's very easy for me. What you need is a Lulu, and I don't know how to get you one.
Hi, Charlie. My name's Julia LaRoche. Last year, we saw a record amount of share repurchases, and now we're hearing rhetoric out of Washington, D.C., specifically legislation to curb stock buybacks. What's your take on stock buybacks, and do you think politicians should be telling companies what to do? Thank you so much.
Well, generally speaking, I'm restrained in my enthusiasm for politicians telling corporations what they should do. But I will say this. When it was a very good idea for companies to buy back their stock, they didn't do very much. And when the stocks got so high priced that it's frequently a bad idea, they're doing a lot. Welcome to adult life. This is the way it is. But it's questionable at the present levels whether a lot of it is smart. Was Eddie Lambert smart to buy back so much shares of Roebuck? No. And there's a lot of that kind of mistake that's been made.
Hi, Charlie. My name is Neil Gonta. I'm a 20-year-old from Kansas, and similar to your Mozart anecdote, I wanted to ask you, What advice would you have for someone my age looking to live a long, successful life like yourself?
Well, I haven't had that much success changing any of my children. And I don't think I can give helpful advice to a perfect stranger. It's hard to improve the next generation. And the standard result is going to be mediocre. And some people are going to succeed, they're going to be few. That's the way human significance is allotted. Human significance will always go to the few. There's no way of creating enough human significance to meet the demand. And I think personal discipline, personal morality, good colleagues, good ideas, all the simple stuff. I'd say if you want to carry one message from Charlie Munger, it's this: if it's trite, it's right. All those old virtues they all work.
Hi, Charlie, in the center in the back. You point out a great deal of human folly, but at least from the perspective of the listener, don't seem to be that upset about it. Has that always been the case, and is that a correct perception?
I didn't quite catch that.
Oh, you point out a great deal of human folly,
Yes.
but seem to have a sense of humor rather than anger or upsetness about it. Is that a correct perception, and has that always been the case for you?
It's a very correct perception. It's my system. I've copied it from the Jews. I saw it worked well from them, and it was my natural inclination anyway. And so, humor is my way of coping.
Hi, Charlie. My question is, what is your proudest accomplishment in life and why?
I don't have a single accomplishment in life that I'm all that proud of. I set out to try and have more uncommon sense than most. Pretty limited objective. And I'm pleased I did as well as I did in that game. And if I had to do all over again, I think it would be a lot harder. I think part of my success was being born in the right place and the right time. So I'm not particularly proud of success that came from being born in the right place at the right time. I'm pleased, but not proud.
Thank you for your time. Mr. Salzman, I have a question for you. I was wondering if you could please comment on how Journal Technologies implements the invariant strategy principles, things like trust, getting employees to go all in, positive sum, and win-win relationships. Thank you very much.
Gary, that's a simple question. How do you solve the problems of God?
First of all, you have to deal with each individual, because each individual, each employee, each independent contractor that we have to work with, each client is different. And so you have to relate to their specific circumstance. You do not handle it because it's in a checklist or something.
Hello, Charlie. Hello, Peter. I'm here on your left. My name is Darren Ho. I'm from Irvine, California. This question is for both of you. Charlie once said, any year that you don't destroy one of your best loved ideas is probably a wasted year. And I'd like to ask if both of you destroy any of your beloved idea in 2018, and if so, what are they? Thank you.
Karen, have you destroyed any idea in 2018?
Say again, I wasn't listening.
Yes, if you have destroyed any good ideas in 2018.
Destroyed any?
Yes.
Eliminated, probably. Probably unbeknownst to me. How about you?
Now, we always think into the future. We're not worried about the past. Just that simple. The day ends, we're on to something different. And it's a different challenge every day. And the good part about my job, it changes every day. So I face something different. I'm like a newspaper editor. I start with a blank page every day. Well, how do I go to the next situation? How do I solve a particular problem? That's my day. That's what I do.
Mr. Munger, thank you for taking the time to answer our questions. In October 2008, a month after Lehman filed bankruptcy and in the depths of the abyss, Mr. Buffett famously wrote an editorial saying that he was buying stocks and he was bullish on America. You're famous for bottom-ticking Wells Fargo in March of 2009. What made you decide to buy Wells Fargo in March of 2009 instead of October of 2008?
Well, I had the money in the later period. And the stock was cheaper. Those are two very important parts of the purchase.
Hi, Charlie. My name's Jordan. I'm from Canada. I'm in the back. I've heard that you've started some new real estate developments. What are you developing now, and what'll be the key to its success?
I didn't catch that either.
Can you hear me?
Oh, real estate.
That you've started some new real estate developments?
No, I bought some apartment houses.
Bought apartment houses?
For my grandchildren.
I heard about
Seemed like
building.
a good idea at the time.
What's the key to their success then? The apartment house is doing well.
By the way, that phrase, it seemed like a good idea at the time, came to me from a man I knew many years ago. In 5 minutes between trains, he managed to conceive an illegitimate child by somebody he met in the bar car. And my father was asked by the young man's father, he had a nice wife and 3 children, what on hell were you thinking about? And you know what the young man said? It seemed like a good idea at the time.
Hi, Charlie.
Yeah.
Charlie, I'm standing to your left. Thank you for sharing your anecdotes. I think everybody loves them. Herb Kelleher passed away recently, and I'm hoping that maybe you have some anecdotes about Herb that you would like to share with us. Thank you.
Who?
Herb Kelleher, the founder of Southwest Airlines.
Yeah, well, he was a very remarkable businessman. I never knew him, but he was an original, and he created an amazingly sound company while drinking one hell of a lot of whiskey and smoking a hell of a lot of cigarettes. This is not my personal style. And to do as well as he did with so much bourbon and so many cigarettes, it set a new record in human life. So we should all remember Herb Kelleher. And we all wish we could have so much strength we could abuse it so much and still perform. I didn't get such a hand. I regard him as a miracle.
Good morning, Mr. Munger. If you didn't have access to Li Lu and to the Chinese exchanges through him, like many Americans don't, would you feel comfortable investing in the American depository shares of most Chinese companies that are comprised of a VIA structure and offer shareholders few rights and minimal protections from the Chinese government?
I don't know much about depository shares. I tend to be suspicious of all investment products created by professionals. And I tend to go where nothing is being hawked aggressively or merchandised aggressively or sold aggressively. So you're talking about a world in which I don't even enter. So I can't help you. You're talking about a territory I avoid.
Hey, Charlie, all the way in the back. This is John Heltzel with Los Altos. So my concern is I've done a lot of research on banks, and you guys have done a great job in helping me. But I also saw large derivative portfolios of these major use of banks are getting quite large on the balance sheets. And SEC reporting doesn't require much transparency. So I thought, do you guys worry about this kind of stuff? I know you have in the past, and in the banks that you own, and then do you worry about other banks as well? Thanks.
Well, all intelligent investors worry about banks because banks present temptations to their managers to do dumb things. There's so many things you can easily do in a bank that looks like a cinch way of reporting more earnings soon, where it's a mistake to do it, long-term considerations being properly considered. As Warren puts it, the trouble with banking is there are more banks than there are good bankers. And he's right about that. And so I would say if you're invested in banks, you have to go into the time when you've got a lot going for you, because there'll be a fair amount of stupidity that creeps into banking.
Hi, Charlie. Jason from San Francisco. When you don't have the luxury of picking your negotiation counterparties, what's your best recommendation for dealing with somebody who not only won't negotiate rationally, but will also criticize you for trying to negotiate rationally?
You're talking about a situation I try and solve by avoidance. If I could solve that problem, I'd have a line around the block. I mean, you wouldn't be able to squeeze in here. Everybody who has an insoluble problem with a difficult person, think of what we'd all do to solve that one. I'm afraid I don't have a solution to that one. Avoidance is my principal method.
Hello. Hello, Mr. Munger. I'm on your left. I'm Zoe Chen from Taiwan. Thank you for sharing everything so generously, and you do sound very Confucians. And happy Valentine's Day. I have two questions for you. The first one is, both you and Mr. Buffett worked in Buffett's grandpa's grocery store at teenage years. And do you think early real world and early working experience gave you a strong advantage over other people in this investing profession? Could you elaborate on that?
Absolutely.
And the
Just
second
as I was able to learn from my dead great-grandfather, when I was a little boy, what I learned at a very young age, when I was just a kid, I could see some of the adults around me were nuts, and yet they were very talented. I could see how much irrationality there was in very talented people. And so I got interested in seeking out the patterns and understanding why it happened and learning tricks to cope and so on. And I did that when I was a little kid. And of course it helped me. Who is not helped by an early start in a promising activity? And what activity could be more promising than diagnosing stupidity?
Hey, Charlie, on your left. Yeah. What level of discount would you be applying to potential investments today? Thank you.
Well, generally speaking, I think the professional investors, they have to accept less than they were used to getting under different conditions. Just as an old man expects less out of his sex life than he had when he was 20. Yeah.
Hello, Mr. Munger. I want to come back to the William Thorndike books, and I now have the list of the 8 companies. It is General Dynamics, Berkshire Hathaway, the Washington Post, DCI, Capital Cities, Teledyne, General Cinema, and Ralston Purina. I know that Berkshire Hathaway have the long-term investment in Washington Post and Capital Cities, and have been invested in companies of John Malone, but why Berkshire did not have long-term investment in General Dynamics, Teledyne, General Cinema, or Ralston Purina?
We did have a huge investment in General Dynamics for a long time, and we made an enormous amount of money with it. After the defense business contracted, nobody else was willing to sell anything except General Dynamics, which kept selling at higher and higher prices. And Warren noticed that. We had a huge position in General Dynamics and made a fortune. We always admired the founder of Teledyne, who was a genius, Henry Singleton. But we admired him from afar. We never invested. It was just one of many mistakes of omission.
Hi, Charlie. Cameron Hamidi from San Diego. I was happy to see you at this meeting, turn 90, now you're 95, and I hope
If you think you're happy, think about it the way I feel.
Well, I hope you live to be 120, and I always thank you for your positive influence on our lives. My question is related to stress and sleep and longevity. In business, there are what I call criminal competitors. You're honest and ethical, but the competitor across the street is beating you by cheating and running a massive insurance fraud. Business and life can cause a lot of stress like it did for Whitney Tilson, but you've always seemed to stay cool like Monish Pobrai. What mental tools do you use to defocus and keep your equanimity for 95 years? How do you detach? And even during the Solomon Brothers scandal, were you always able to get 8 hours of sleep at night?
Well, it's not true. As a matter of fact, I had more difficulty sleeping when I was young, but I do have a tip for that I've learned late in life. I never consciously blanked out my mind when I tried to go to sleep, and so I allowed my mind to wrestle through my problems and keep me awake very, very late while I lay in bed wrestling with problems. And then if I didn't sleep well one night, I figured, what the hell, I'll sleep the next night. But that was pretty stupid. Now I actually deliberately blank out my mind and I can go to sleep rather easily, and I recommend it to all of you. It really works. I don't know why the hell I didn't get to it before 93.
Hi, Charlie. Thank you for your answers. You gave Robert Cialdini one share of Berkshire for writing Influence and a $20,000 check to Atul Gawande for writing a New Yorker article on healthcare. I apologize for any mispronouncements. Are there any other writers you gave something to for their writing or ideas?
I've forgotten, but there aren't many. Atul Gawande is a very remarkable position and person, and so is Cialdini. And so I do that kind of weird stuff occasionally, but I don't do it all the time. I'm proud of those two, by the way.
Hi, Charlie. Ian Spockwith from Virginia. If someone can invent a time machine and you can go back and have dinner with your version self of 41-year-old, what piece of advice would you advise your former self now that you are, 74, 75, with all the knowledge that you have now? Thank you.
Well, I'd avoid that one mistake of omission that cost me half of the net worth I would now have if I'd been smarter. I mean, we can all go back and make some decision better. But it's the nature of the thing, you're going to blow one occasionally. My general idea is there's no point in fretting too much about what you can't fix. And it's a big mistake to fill yourself with resentments and hatreds and so on. And it's such a simple idea, but so many people ruin their lives unnecessarily. It's like, envy is such a stupid thing to have, because you can't possibly have any fun with that particular sin. Who in the hell ever had any fun in envy? What good could envy possibly do for you? And somebody's always going to be doing better than you are. It's really stupid. And so my system in life is to figure out what's really stupid and then avoid it. It doesn't make me popular, but it prevents a lot of trouble.
Hi, Charlie. Alan Wong from San Francisco. I was just wondering if you could comment on the Berkshire portfolio. I mean, we're here on Valentine's Day, listening to a 95-year-old, we're thinking about healthcare. And why is there so little healthcare in the Berkshire portfolio? And, I mean, isn't there something can you comment on that?
I think we don't understand it well enough, and we don't like a lot that we do understand. Those are two pretty good reasons for not investing.
Hi, Charlie. This is Sridhar from San Francisco Bay Area. There are a lot of companies in my region which I read. They kind of produce a winner-take-it-all style of outcome. Do you have any thoughts on such kind of business models? Have you seen it in the 50s and 60s, and Any thoughts?
Well, I didn't quite get that. Are you investing in India or where?
No. These are companies which produce a winner-take-it-all type of outcome.
Yes.
Do you have thoughts on what...
What's ideal if you can find one in advance and predict it accurately? It's perfect. Winner take all. It's obviously perfect.
What do you think are the limitations?
It's very
of
difficult
such
to
models?
do because everybody's looking for the same thing.
Hi, Mr. Munger.
Yeah.
You talk about identifying your circle of competence and trying to expand it. I'm at a point in my life where I don't really know what my circle of competence is, so I would like to know how you found yours.
I didn't catch that either.
So you talk about your circle of competence, and you should stick to it and try to expand it.
Oh, yeah, well, it's a hugely important thing, knowing the edge of your... It's hardly a competence if you don't know the edge of it. You know, if you have a misapprehension regarding your own competency, that means you lack competency. You're going to make terrible mistakes. So hardly anything is... I think you got to constantly measure what you achieve against what other people have achievement, and you have to keep being determinedly rational and avoiding a lot of self-delusion. But after a lifetime of observing it, I think the tendency to be pretty rational about one's own competency is largely genetic. I think people like Warren and I were just born this way. Now, it took a lot of education, but I think we were born with the right temperament to do what we did. And I have no way of taking you back and rebirthing you.
Hi, Charlie.
Yeah.
In spite of being partners for so long, why is Warren so much richer than you?
Well, he got an earlier start. He was probably a little smarter. He worked harder. There are not a lot of reasons. Why was Albert Einstein poorer than I was?
Let's say good night, Charlie.
We are coming to the end of our allotted time. I'll take one more question and then we'll quit.
Make it a good one.
We're through.
Hello, Mr. Munger. I'm Richard Lewis from Culver City. You've been very positive on the investment prospects of China, and you've said that most of Americans are missing out on China. What do you think we're missing, and what should we be aware of when we invest in China? Thank you.
Well, what you're missing is that there's more opportunities there than there is here. And I can't, yeah. I don't see how I could guide you any more firmly than that. Are you finding things so easy here you don't need China? Well, with that, we're through. Yeah.
Oh,
yes, it is.
I'm taking some.
Thank you all for attending the Daily Journal shareholder meeting this year. We welcome you all back for next year.
Thank you. Thank you.
Enough, Charlie?
Yeah, we are.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have to leave you. Yes, you can have all you want.